Hello and welcome on behalf of the First United Methodist Church in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. This weekend, the preacher will be the Reverend Catherine Bowers, who is a retired United Methodist pastor, and she will be speaking on Solomon's dream, in which God appeared and said, "What do you want? Just ask me. What do you want?" And I'm not going to step on her toes. I think that's going to be a great topic and a wonderful thing to think about. Um, but what I will do is offer once again a sermon that was preached on June 10th, 2018, that comes from the third letter of John. And I'm going to be concentrating on just two verses, but uh, the book is so short that it only has one chapter. And it fits on one page with a lot of room at the top and a lot of room at the bottom. Sad to say, the sermon that I have is longer than the book itself. But here's what John had to say. The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health, just as it is well with your soul. I was overjoyed when some of the friends arrived and testified to your faithfulness to the truth, namely, how you walk in the truth. I have no greater joy than this, to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Beloved, you do faithfully whatever you do for the friends, even though they are strangers to you. They've testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on in a manner worthy of God, for they began their journey for the sake of Christ, accepting no support from non believers. Therefore, we ought to support such people, so that we may become co workers with the truth. I've written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So, if I come, I will call attention to what he is doing in spreading false charges against us. And not content with those charges, he refuses to welcome the friends and even prevents those who want to do so and expels them from the church. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but imitate what is good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Everyone has testified favorably about Demetrius, and so has the truth itself. We also testify for him, and you know that our testimony is true. I have much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. Instead, I hope to see you soon, and we'll talk together face to face. Peace to you. The friends send you their greetings. Greet the friends there, each by name. Thus ends the third letter of John. And I really do wish that I could say it's the only section of the New Testament that deals with problems between specific people, but it's not. The earliest letters that are in the New Testament, even earlier than the Gospels, are letters that Paul wrote to churches that he had started. Uh, and the first letter we have that he sent to the Corinthians uh, is all about that. That church broke down into a lot of different parties or cliques. I, I almost said teams, but I think cliques is probably the better description. And there's this wonderful section where toward the end, Paul just mentions two people by name, two women that he had worked with, and whom he seems to have an affinity for and an appreciation of. Their names were Euodia and Syntyche, and he told them, please agree in the Lord. Presumably saying, okay, if you can't agree on everything, at least agree on the things that most matter to you, your faith in Christ. That whole letter, and I will get to the third letter of John, really, truly, but first this little bit about First Corinthians, where Paul puts it right out there, and he tells everybody there off, lovingly, of course, but he does tell them off. He says, "Do not deceive yourselves. If you think that you are wise in this age, you should become fools, so that you may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. So let no one boast about human leaders. For all things are yours, whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future. All belong to you, and you belong to Christ, and Christ belongs to God." Well, that sums things up pretty well, wouldn't you say? Everything is God's, and when we fight one another, we're fighting against something that is God's or someone who is God's. But in Third John, we hear from one of those human leaders that Paul says, don't you boast in human leaders. And we hear about another human leader. While between these two human leaders, a big fight is going on. Somebody named Diotrephes has been denying John's authority. Aha, there's another person getting involved in this. So it isn't just a two-way fight, it's a three-way fight, what we might call a cage match. And in the course of this argument, cage match, whatever it was, Diotrephes has been denying John's authority and asserting his own, and has refused to help people that John had passed along. So it's not just three of them, it's others taking some of the flack and some of the fallout from a fight involving people they haven't even met. And so John has been sending these people on, asking others to help them, probably as traveling evangelists, get from one place to the next. John says they began their journey for the sake of Christ, accepting no support from non believers. And John told the church to support such people so we may become co workers with the truth. So, in the middle of this fight, in the middle of this trouble, John is saying, okay, you got your trouble with somebody else, but don't let it get in the way of people hearing the good word of Christ. And that is an absolutely important thing for all of us to hear at any point. Because when Christians fight, people who are not Christian look at it and say, why should I get involved with that? Why should I have anything to do with that? If I want to fight, I can find one of my own. And so these other people who are doing their best to live faithful and fearless lives and live out the gospel have been caught up in this spat between Diotrephes and John. And John is saying that this is getting in the way of them living out their calling, and it's getting in the way of the whole bunch of them living out their callings. And how is this fight being conducted? John mentions that Diotrephes has been doing some rumor mongering. He says, I've written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will call attention to what he has been doing in spreading false charges against us. False charges. Let's look at this a little bit. You shall not bear false witness is one of the Ten Commandments. Exodus, when it's looking at false witness, expands on it a little bit. It says, you shall not spread a false report, you shall not join with the wicked to act as a malicious witness. You shall not follow a majority in wrongdoing. When you bear witness in a lawsuit, you shall not side with the majority so as to pervert justice, nor shall you be partial to the poor in a lawsuit. In other words, tell the truth. If something is not going on, don't suggest that it is. And if it is going on, tell it as it is. Don't let interest of any sort color what you're saying in any way. Well, the situation in 3rd John may not have come down to a lawsuit, but the beginning part is there, and the rumor mongering is there, and the storytelling apparently is there. False reports are going around, and John is not there to defend himself, whatever those reports may be. And I really like the fact he says, look, I could set things down with pen and ink, but I really just want to talk everything over with everybody face to face. And honestly, isn't that the best way to do things in general? Because sometimes you can write words on a page, or may I add, on a website, and they're one thing when you say them because of your intonation, and because of your relationship with one or two people that might hear you, and they might know what you mean, and they might hear things that don't come across when they're simply read. Face to face is always the best means of communication. And if sometimes you have to write something, and don't text, forget that. Um, that's really insufficient. But maybe the best thing to write is like John did. Can we meet and talk it out? You know, back when I first wrote this, back in 2018, uh, one of the things that was going on was that 1,500 children who had been arrested along with their families along the US Mexican border, and that had been handed over to the authorities, had been separated from their parents and had disappeared. And it's easy to say that those kids had simply been locked up, or that something terrible had happened to them. And there were a couple that actually did die under those conditions. Um, but there were others, and some of them, at least first, um, we found out that some of the missing kids had been sent to relatives who were already in the States. And if they weren't accounted for, it seems that one of the things that happened was that the relatives who took the kids in um, were protecting them and saying, look, with all that's being done legally and illegally, with the carelessness that the government was showing at that time about what was happening to families and what was happening to children, with the whole thing being used as a political football. And the people who were getting kicked were these children. With all of that in place, the relatives were not going to, for the most part, return the kids, but they were going to protect them, hide them if they needed to. And I'm not saying that that was necessarily the best way to do things, but it certainly was an understandable thing that was happening because not all of the missing children have even to this day been found. And many who were sent back to places that they had originally come from disappeared once they were there, and we don't know what happened to them. It's a big and a horrible situation. And it's one of many situations where it's very easy to make accusations and to talk about things that we don't know for sure as actually being factual. And when that takes place within a wider situation where people are making up stories for their own ends, it's even worse. John, when he wrote to the church, was insistent that we should be very careful in our own capacity and in the situations we do have some control over, to be very careful not to let the things that we say or hear get out of hand. This letter repeats language that had been previously used in 2nd John, which expresses a desire to renew a relationship of trust and friendship in which these things can be handled. Whatever things were going on and whatever stories were being told. John says, I've much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. Instead, I hope to see you soon, and we will talk together face to face. False rumors were going around, and it happens. But when you add malice or power grabbing into the mix, as John suggests that Diotrephes may have been doing, and yes, John here is saying things about Diotrephes, like he's saying, don't say things about him. Um, but if you know for sure that it's something that they're saying you have done, you have every right and every reason to say, hold on, what they're saying about me is not true. Make sure it's not true before you say that. But if so, don't be afraid to stand up. But neither should you necessarily jump to conclusions about people who may have said even something about you. And John again says people shouldn't look at somebody else, somebody whom they know and trust, somebody whose example they admire. They shouldn't look at that person and jump to conclusions. And so, if there's another person who fits that description, somebody they know, somebody they trust, somebody they admire, maybe that is somebody who can step in and help smooth things out. Trust the process, basically, the process that Jesus had outlined. If you've got a problem with somebody, talk to them first. If you have a problem further, take somebody with you so that there's somebody there who hears what is said and can listen, and so it's not two people with some sort of beef hearing what they hear through the ears of anger, but somebody who can clarify, maybe verify, certainly, what is said and done. John suggests here somebody named Demetrius, somebody he says cares about the truth. And my guess is that he was the type of person who would say to people, wait and see. When John gets here, we'll sort the whole thing out. Meantime, don't jump to conclusions. There were times that this has repeated itself across the centuries. Two great evangelists, John Wesley and George Whitefield, had started as college buddies at Oxford. But in the course of their careers, they both, as evangelists, nevertheless found themselves going in different directions theologically until it reached the point that each one saw the other as somebody who could possibly be leading people astray. And they started publishing pamphlets decrying each other's stances. There's a preacher slash artist in North Carolina, a guy named Charlie Bieber, who puts out a comic strip, and it's called The Wesley Brothers. And yes, it is a very geeky kind of a comic strip. Um, I get it by email every week that it's published. And it deals with this kind of thing. It deals with a lot of theological questions. And the week before I wrote this sermon back in 2018, um, Charlie Bieber had written this to go with the cartoon that he had drawn. It said this: it's interesting how little we've changed in the ways that we publicly thrash the people who think differently than us, and how quick we are to part ways with dear friends in order to preserve our own way of talking about Jesus. When love is passionate, this protective instinct rises up in us, and with hostility, we rise up to defend the ones we love. When we bring the guns of self defense and lay them on the altar table for self preservation, it leads to escalation. When we take communion with all our loaded weapons pointed at the person next to us and all their loaded weapons pointed back at us, we imagine the only way to feel safe again is to just part ways. It's too scary to lay down our weapons. We think that we think that must mean that we don't really love the people we're trying to protect. We're not really being faithful to Jesus if we don't crusade and destroy the people that think differently about him. And Like the men in that comic, our theological wars leave a wake of destruction. Unquote. Whether it's politics or theology, whether it's a neighborhood argument or a disagreement, even a fight in the workplace, a lot of things work exactly that way. Everybody needs, at some point, to find a Demetrius, somebody to counteract the Diotrephes tendencies that anybody can find in themselves. And agree and disagree and argue when it matters, of course. Absolutely. By no means cower. But when you do stand up to an opponent, be sure to do it in an honorable and a faithful way. Be sure that you don't lump one issue in with another that's unrelated. Make sure that what you say is true. And check out what you hear before you repeat it. Do not be hasty to believe the worst of anybody. And keep innocent bystanders out of it. Take a time out when you need a time out. And above all, don't let anything you say or do hinder those around you who are just trying to spread the good news. The good news of Jesus, who came to reconcile all of us to God. Jesus, the friends who are everywhere depend on him. And so, as John says, peace to you. The friends send their greetings. Greet the friends there, each one by name.